This is the third and last of History Hub Ulster's Belfast Blitz 80 talks. This one concerns Belfast Blitz fatalities buried in Carnmoney. On the aerial view that I've put up, you can see the various cemeteries, graveyards in the Carnmoney area. So obviously the largest is Carnmoney Council Cemetery, with the main cemetery on this side and Carnmoney East over here. You've then got the Carnmoney Jewish Cemetery, which shows up quite nicely. And then there are three graveyards associated with Carnmoney Parish Church. I'll be mainly talking about the burials in this graveyard, Carnmoney Main, but there will be some references to burials elsewhere. 173 fatalities from the German air raids have been identified as being buried in the cemeteries in Carnmoney. 141 in the council cemetery, 25 in the various graveyards for Carnmoney Parish, and 1 in Carnmoney Jewish Cemetery. In addition, there are 2 fatalities where the death notice is just referred to buried in Carnmoney without specifying which graveyard. I've been able to exclude these from the Carnmoney Council graveyards as they don't appear on the Antrim and Newton Abbey Borough Council online burial records. If you're not aware of that, contact me through History Hub Ulster and they'll arrange to get you the link which you can use to access those burial records. There's also 4 fatalities who are commemorated on headstones in the council cemetery, but not actually buried in the plots. In other words, these would be situations where maybe several members of a family have died, 3 of the bodies have been recovered and identified and buried, and the 4th person has maybe either been no body recovered, or if a body was recovered, it wasn't identified. And so they've still commemorated the person on the headstone. So as I said, whilst the talk's going to focus on the council cemeteries, I will be making a few other references. 43 fatalities who died during or after the 2 air raids of May 1941 are buried in Carnmoney, but there's no memorial or marker at the final resting places of 24 of those fatalities, which is similar to what you get for Dundonald's, Belfast City Cemetery, Milltown Cemetery. So I'm going to start off with the person who is, to my knowledge, the only member of Belfast's Jewish community who died during the German air raids. And my thanks to Richard Graham for this photograph, which is in Carnmoney Jewish Cemetery. Moses, sometimes Morris Barnett Jacobson, was born on 5th April 1895 at St. Kelvin's Parade in Dublin to Isaac Jacobson and Esther Michalowski, which was anglicised to Michelson on the birth register. Isaac, Esther and their eldest child Jacob were recorded in the census returns as being born in Russia. Isaac was a glazier and mineral water manufacturer, and Moses was an assistant in the business in 1911 when the family was residing at Camden Street in the Fitzwilliam area of Dublin. Morris was a commercial traveller when he married Jenny Cohen at the Belfast Synagogue in Annesley Street, just off the Antrim Road, on 13th July 1927. They had 2 children, Claire in 1930 and Faye in 1932. He was listed as the householder at 64 Dufferin Avenue in Dublin from 1929 to 1936, and was listed as the householder at 30 Eglinton Street in 1939. Eglinton Street is off the Crumlin Road, and it's a part of Belfast where a lot of the Jewish immigrants from Russia settled. There's a part of it which was known colloquially as Little Israel. Morris Barnett Jacobson was a member of Shalom Masonic Lodge number 635, and he was injured at Eglinton Street and died at the Mater Hospital on 5th May 1941 at the age of 46. And as I said, he's buried in the Jewish cemetery at Carnmoney. Again, another first. And this is the only, as far as I'm aware, the only German-born resident of Belfast who died during the German air raids. And he lived at Annandale Street in the New Lodge area. In 1939, there were 15 houses between the Antrim Road and Burke Street on one side and Burlington Street on the other side. In 1943, 14 house plots are recorded as vacant ground and one house is recorded as vacant. In other words, both sides of the street for a certain distance had been basically totally obliterated. Where it says vacant ground, that indicates where houses have been physically knocked down, and where a house is marked as vacant, it's possible that the house was not habitable, but at the same time was not in such a bad condition that it warranted being pulled down. And so it's possibly a house that was in the process of being renovated or repaired. I've marked out at number 6 Annandale Street in 1939, the gentleman I'm going to be talking about, Ryken William, a waiter. So Ernest William Ryken was born on 14th April 1876 at Neumünster in Germany to Daniel John Friedrich Ryken and Wiebke Julie Louise Mann. William Ryken worked as a waiter at the Carlton Cafe and Restaurant on Donegal Place, and I've included an old photograph of the Carlton Cafe and Restaurant and the building as it appears today. You can see from the layout the distinctive windows and orientation of the windows, and the pediments above the windows indicates that I've got the right building. So that was just before the arcade on Donegal Place. He married Mary Louisa Partridge on 15th April 1900 at St Anne's Parish Church in Belfast, and in 1911 William and Louisa and their son William were living at Hillman Street in the Dock Ward, and the family was recorded as being Presbyterian. In the 1901 census, Ernest William had been recorded as being Brethren. By 1932, the Ryken family was living at number 6 Annandale Street. In November 1939, William Ryken was interviewed as an enemy alien by the Northern Ireland District Tribunal. He was classified as a Category B, but was exempted from being interned due to his wife's illness. William and Louisa Ryken were killed at Annandale Street on 15th-16th April 1941. A death notice recorded that William was buried in Carnmoney on 22nd April, but there's no record of the burial in the registers of Carnmoney Cemetery. It's probable that he's buried in one of the graveyards associated with the church, but not all of their records are available. Pardon me. Louisa's body was either not recovered or was not identified, and she was declared as having died at the mass coroner's inquiry held on 26th June 1941. It's somewhat ironic that if William Ryken had been interned in 1939, he would probably have survived the war. 3 fatalities commemorated on the Belfast Civil Defence Services Memorial in Belfast City Hall died during the May air raids and are buried in Carnmoney. The first one is John Davison, or John Fletcher Anderson Davison, who was born on 9th December 1883 at Stratheden Street to William Davison, who is a shipyard joiner, and Louisa Anderson. His mother died of chronic endocarditis on 20th May 1898, and his father died of bronchitis on 10th of April 1909. John Davison's occupation was recorded as a fitter in 1901 and as a van man when he married Louisa Margaret Henderson on 17th April 1912 at Newington Presbyterian Church. In 1915, when their daughter Evelyn was born, his occupation was recorded as machine man, which would be a similar occupation to fitter. The family was living at Gainsborough Drive in the York Road area in 1939, and John was a volunteer with the ARP Rescue Service. Their eldest daughter Evelyn was a volunteer with the British Red Cross Detachment number 46. John Davison was 57 years old when he was killed at Gainsborough Drive, and he was buried on 7th May 1941. And as I said, his name is recorded as Davidson on the Belfast Civil Defence Services Memorial rather than Davison. William John Braniff was the son of David Braniff, a plumber, and Agnes Beattie of 130 Alliance Parade. William was an ARP warden based at ARP Post 217. I've been trying recently to find out where the various ARP posts were located, and I now have a list of over 140 ARP posts in the greater Belfast area, but not all of them give the number, so I don't know where ARP Post 217 was. He was injured at Alliance Road, and he died at the Mater Hospital on 5th May. He was 18 years old and was buried on 7th May. And 7th May seems to be quite a common burial date for people interred in Carnmoney Cemetery as a result of the German air raids. So there's probably sort of almost like mass funerals all more or less at the one time. A death notice placed by a brother included this verse, which I've put on the screen. It's only good night, dear brother, just as we used to say. We will meet again in the morning at the dawn of a happier day. As you can see, there's no marker or memorial at his grave, at William John Braniff's grave. The third of the men recorded on the Civil Defence Memorial is James Doherty of Inishowen, 62 Old Cave Hill Road. And he was the active partner in James Doherty and Company of 37 Victoria Street, which sold radios and batteries. James was the senior warden at ARP Post 323 and was recorded as being the Deputy Chief Warden and Chief Bomb Identification Officer for the Belfast Rural District on the Commonwealth War Graves Civilian War Dead database. There were 2 ARP posts located on the Cave Hill Road, so either of those could be ARP Post 323, or indeed ARP Post 323 could be in another part of North Belfast. James Doherty died on the Ballysillin Road at the age of 39 and was interred on 7th May 1941. He was survived by his widow Margaret, and on 26th May 1941, a prosecution against James Doherty under the Prices of Goods Act was heard at the Belfast Police Court. Evidence was given that James Doherty had sold the torch battery for 7.5 pence when the maximum price had been set at 5.5 pence. His widow, who assisted in the business, was called to give evidence just 19 days after her husband had been buried. Margaret Doherty informed the court that 5 gross of the batteries had been purchased from ERA at a price of 6.5 pence each. She added that whilst they knew about the price cap for British batteries, they did not know that the cap applied to batteries that were brought in from ERA or the Irish Free State. The resident magistrate imposed a fine of 5 shillings, which is the equivalent of £14 in current terms. So even though James Doherty was dead by the time the court case was brought, they still persisted with the court case and levied a fine on Margaret. This is an interesting situation with this one. Mary Hyland was born on 21st June 1890 at Spamount Street in Belfast to Francis Hyland and Ellen Hunter. In 1911, Mary was recorded as being a hemstitcher and Francis was recorded as being a wenchman. Hopefully that is an error for winchman rather than a philanderer. Mary married William Jameson, who was a machinist, on 9th July 1913 at Duncairn Gardens Presbyterian Church. Mary Jameson was 50 years old when she died at Serpentine Gardens, which runs between the Antrim Road down to the Shore Road, on 5th May 1941. Her body was transported from Rogers Felt Works to Carnmoney Cemetery for burial on 7th May. Whilst there's no memorial at the plot where she's buried, she is commemorated on the headstone at her parents' plot, which is in a nearby section. It doesn't refer to her as being a Blitz fatality or a fatality as a result of enemy action, but given the connections, it is the same person. Most of the people who were buried in Carnmoney Cemetery came or died in and around the Greencastle, Whitewell, White House area of Belfast. And this is an area which doesn't get as much coverage as some of the other areas of Belfast. For example, the Blitz map, which has been produced, which is a digital version online, it doesn't include the bombs that landed at Whitewell Road or in and around the Greencastle White House area. Barber Street in Greencastle was close to the White House spinning and weaving mill on Mill Road, which I've circled in red. And this was owned by the Barber family of Lisburn. There were 32 houses recorded for Barber Street in the 1939 Belfast Street Directory. In the 1943 directory, which I've included on this slide, there is no one recorded as living in that street. All the houses have either been knocked down or were vacant, uninhabitable. 25 people from Barber Street are recorded as dying on the 5th of May, and one man died of injuries on the 11th of May. 21 of these fatalities died at 3 specific houses, 10 at number 18, 5 at number 19, and 6 at number 22. And for the next few minutes, I'm going to be focusing in on the fatalities from this specific street because it had such a high level. Barber Street was so short that it doesn't even get mentioned on the high level maps of the area. So I know it was close to the spinning mill, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it is on the map. I'd need to have access to a more detailed map to be able to do that. So the first one is the 10 people who died at 18 Barber Street, and they belong to the Black, Dowd and Knox families, and 6 of them are buried in a double plot with this memorial in Carnmoney Cemetery. The inscription on the headstone reads, "In loving memory of our dear mother Annie Black, also our dear Aunt Agnes, brackets Mrs. Knox, also our dear sisters Hetty, Eva and Renee, also our dear brother Jim, and our dear niece Hazel, killed through enemy action, 5th May 1941. Deeply regretted." 9 of the fatalities from this extended family died at Barber Street, and their bodies were taken to Erskine's Felt Works, which was a temporary morgue down in White House itself. Eva Black was badly injured and taken to the Royal Victoria Hospital, where she died later the same day. So she was probably injured on the night of 4th, 5th May and died later on 5th May. Annie Harrison was born on 30th of July 1884 at Shipboy Street in Belfast to Isaac Harrison and Emily O'Neill, and she married Francis Black on the 25th of June 1906 at Trinity Church of Ireland. Trinity Church of Ireland was one of the many churches in North Belfast which were totally destroyed during the German air raids. Frank Black died on 12th April 1937, and 2 of their sons, Frank and Robert, were in active service overseas at the time of the air raids. Annie Black was 57 years old when she died, along with 4 of her daughters, a son and 3 granddaughters. Hessie Black was 23, and her daughter Hazel was 2. Eva Black was 21, Evelyn Black was 14, and James Black was 12. The funeral service for the Black family was held at White House Presbyterian Church on 8th May prior to interment in Carnmoney Cemetery. Agnes Knox, a married elder sister of Annie Black, is recorded as residing at 18 Barber Street when she died. Agnes Harrison was born on 19th November 1874, also at Shipboy Street in the Docks ward of Belfast, and she married David Knox, a sailor, on 24th May 1903 at Trinity Church of Ireland. She was 66 years old and is buried in the same double plot, and her name, as I said earlier, is on the memorial plaque. Annie, the eldest daughter of Francis and Annie Black, was born on 29th January 1910 at Ballygoland in the White House area. She married John Dowd on 3rd February 1934. On the roll of honour for the civilian war dead for the Second World War, their address is given as 18 Barber Street, but death notices record that John Dowd was living at Dandy Street in Greencastle. It's possible that John was residing at Dandy Street when the death notices were placed, as Barber Street had been destroyed. Alternatively, it's possible that Annie and her 2 children might have been visiting her parents when the air raid started. Annie Dowd was 31 years old when she died, along with her 2 daughters, Maureen, who was 6, and Anne, who was 2. They were buried in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery on 9th May after a funeral mass at St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church in Greencastle, and there is no memorial at their grave. 5 members of the Rowley and Rogers family are buried in this plot. Charles James Rowley was born on 20th June 1881 at Dumbarton Road in Partick to James Rowley, who was a ship's joiner, and Margaret Ann Munn. His mother died on 27th April 1886 at Whiteinch in Lanarkshire. James Rowley was living in Belfast when he married Elizabeth Todd in 1894. Their only child, James Rowley, was wounded during the Great War while serving with the Royal Army Medical Corps. Emily Christie was born on 9th December 1881 at Knockinturn near Coleraine to Crawford Christie and Margaret Smith. Charles Rowley was a riveter when he married Emily Christie on 24th December 1904, again at Trinity Church of Ireland. In 1911, Charles, Emily and their 3 children were living with James Rowley at Ritchie Street in the Duncairn ward. At the time of the air raids, Charles and Emily Rowley were living with their married son at 19 Barber Street. Jack Rowley, the eldest child of Charles and Emily, was born on 21st October 1904 at Ivan Street, and he married Jane Rowley was born on 21st October 1904 at Ivan Street, and she married Robert Rogers on 29th December 1928, again at Trinity Church of Ireland. Trinity Church of Ireland seems to be a very common place, along with St. Anne's Parish Church, for weddings at that time. Robert Rowley was not at the family home during the air raid, as he was on active service. It's unclear whether he was on active service overseas or was on active service within the United Kingdom or even within Northern Ireland. 4 of the Rowley-Rogers family died at Barber Street. Emily Rowley was 59 years old. Her daughter Jenny was 36. Her grandson Robert was 10, and her granddaughter Phyllis was 8, and they were all buried on 9th May 1941. Charles James Rowley was injured at 19 Barber Street and died at the Mazarine Hospital near Antrim on 11th May at the age of 59. The plot in Carnmoney was reopened for his interment on the 13th of May, and one of the death notices placed included this verse: "What peaceful hours we once enjoyed, how sweet the memory still, but they have left an aching void the world can never fill." So that's 2 of the extended families from Barber Street who suffered extensive fatalities during the German air raid. And I'm going to move on now to the final family in that street that I'm talking about. 6 members of the McTurnahan Smith family of 22 Barber Street were killed on 5th May and again buried on 7th May. The funerals was from a relative's house in Ivy Row, White House. And it's unclear whether it was Mrs. McTurnahan who lived at Ivy Street and was maybe visiting her family in Barber Street. The surname is recorded as McTurnahan, as it is on the screen there in the Commonwealth War Graves and Cemetery burial records, but it has also been recorded as Metturnahan, in other words, without a C, with the C being replaced with an E, and as Mettarnahan, where the C is replaced by an E and the E is replaced by an A, which is somewhat confusing. And my thanks to Valerie Kerr for providing some of the details in this segment, and in particular in pointing out the 2 variant spellings of the surname. So Elizabeth Jane Robinson was a linen yarn spinner boarding with the Boyd family at Upper White House Street in 1901. She married Thomas McTurnahan, a foreman, on 17th December 1906 at Castleton Presbyterian Church on York Street. Thomas died on the 5th of April 1909 at Ballygoland, and Elizabeth and their 2 children, Ellen and Thomas, were living at Plantation Street in White House in 1911. Elizabeth Jane McTurnahan is recorded as being 55 years old when she died. Ellen Robinson, their eldest child, was born on 14th October 1907 at Drumnadroe in White House, and she married James Smith on 9th March 1928. The online Groney system records the marriage location as Duncairn Presbyterian Church or St. Enoch's Presbyterian Church. And that's because that system, where two churches have amalgamated, for any births or for any marriages before the amalgamation, they can't show the specific church, and so they show both churches, which means that anyone researching this will still not know which church the ceremony took place unless they go back to church records. And I'm not sure why the system is created in that way, because they should be able to have more than two references for a particular combined congregation. Ellen's husband was on active service and was not at the family home at the time of the air raids. Again, it's unclear whether the active service was overseas or on the home front. Ellen, or Nellie, as she was known, was 36 years old when she died, and 4 of her children also died in the raid. Lawrence Smith was 12, May or Mary Smith was 10, Elizabeth or Lily was 7, and Sadie was 5. All buried in this double plot in Carnmoney Cemetery. But there's no memorial, there's no marker, there's nothing to indicate that that is the grave of a family of Blitz fatalities. 3 people who died at Ainsworth Pass are commemorated at this plot, and the faded inscription reads, "In loving memory of John Watt, also his mother-in-law Elizabeth Hawkins and his brother-in-law Bertie Hawkins, killed by enemy action on 5th May 1941. Elizabeth Croll, C-R-O-L-L, was born on 17th January 1896 at Anglesey Street to Gone Henry Croll and his wife Mary Jane. Sometimes the surname is represented as Croll, C-R-O-A-L, but I'm using the more common version. Her maiden name is recorded as Matthews in the Register of Marriages and in the Register of Birth entries for 2 of Elizabeth's elder siblings, but as Hawthorne for Elizabeth and her brother Arthur. The mother's name is recorded as Matthews in the 1903 Register of Births for Thomas, the last child of Gone and Mary Jane. So it's unclear why she changed her maiden name for the registration of 2 of her children. On the marriage register, there's no details recorded for the father, which would indicate that she was an illegitimate birth. So it's possible that she had found out who her biological father was and used his surname when they were registering 2 of the sons or 2 of the children, and then reverted to her birth mother's surname. That's the only explanation I can think of, and it doesn't really make much sense, to be quite honest. Anyway, moving on. Elizabeth Croll married John Albert Hawkins on 29th March 1914 at Trinity Church of Ireland. Their first child, Florence, was born on 15th January 1915 at Mayo Street. Elizabeth Hawkins was living at 13 Ainsworth Pass when she died at the age of 43, along with her son, John Albert, also known as Bertie Hawkins, who was 14. Florence Hawkins married John Watt, who was a shipwright, on 8th April 1936 at Shankle Road Baptist Church. John Watt had been born on 2nd August 1912 at March Street, and his parents were John Watt and Anna McRae, and they later lived at 338 Shankle Road. The Watt family was living at 42 Ainsworth Pass, in other words, not far from the in-laws, when John Watt Jr. died at the age of 28. A mother and daughter living at Greymount Lodge on the Whitewell Road died on 5th May. Greymount Lodge was at the entrance to the Greymount House estate. This had been at the estate of the Gray family, who had owned the adjacent bleach mill. And this lane down here that runs alongside Fort William Golf Course down to the Shore Road is called, or was called, Gray's Lane. The Greymount Intermediate and Open Air Special School was built on the site of the mill behind the main house in the 1920s. So the mill was originally in this area here behind Greymount House. And in the 1920s, as I said, it became an open air school. In 1919, Greymount House was purchased by Belfast Corporation for use as a municipal hospital to treat children suffering from tuberculosis. As you can see, there's a veranda has been installed around the two sides of the house, and patients were wheeled out onto the veranda in their beds to get fresh air and exposure to sunlight, as this would raise their vitamin D levels, and these were key elements at the time in the treatment of tuberculosis. Greymount House was later used as the headquarters of the Auxiliary Fire Service during the Second World War, and the Mansion House remains and now forms part of Hazelwood Integrated College. In between times, it was Greymount Intermediate Girls' School. This Blitz fatality grave is marked by a plain Celtic cross with the inscription, "In loving memory of Susan Story and her daughter Renee, killed by enemy action, 5th May 1941. Susanna Story was 59 and her daughter Rachel Kathleen May, or Renee, was 34, and they were living at Greymount Lodge, 74 Whitewell Road, when they died. Susanna Foy was born on 20th December 1881 at Waringstown to John Foy Weaver and Rachel English. She was living at Ratcliffe Street in Belfast when she married Constable Thomas Henry Story on the 5th of December 1905 at Christ Church, Belfast. That's on College Square, and is now the library for Inst. Thomas Henry Story was stationed at College Square Barracks, and the wedding was conducted by the Reverend Lawrence Parsons Story, who served with the Soldiers Christian Association during the Great War. It's unclear whether Thomas Henry Story and Lawrence Parsons Story were related or not, but I think it's quite humorous that Lawrence Parsons Story was a minister of the cloth. Susanna or Susan Story was recorded as being a midwife in the 1939 Belfast Street Directory, and she was 59 years old when she died. Rachel Anna Story, known as Renee, was one of twins born on 6th September 1906 at Elm Street in Belfast, and Elm Street is in the Lower Ormeau area now. She was working as a nurse in 1939. It's possible, indeed probable, that she was working at Greymount House, but she could also have been working at the nearby White Abbey Hospital, or indeed at the Throne Hospital. She was 34 years old when she died. A mother and her infant daughter from York Park off the Shore Road were buried in this plot on 9th May 1941. The headstone, as you can see, is modern and based on the uniformity of the inscription and the inclusion of exact dates of birth. It was probably erected as a result of genealogical research by the family in recent years. And quite often now you will see these headstones in cemeteries, sometimes replacing previous headstones, but sometimes headstones erected for the first time. And the amount of detail on them indicates that it's because you don't normally get exact dates of birth recorded on headstones. So it is indicative that it's been erected as a result of more modern or more recent research. Mary Elizabeth Watson was born on 28 September 1910 at Galgorm Street in Ballymena to Henry Taylor, who was a pawnbroker's assistant, and Annie Watson. She married Henry Vannon, a plumber, on 25th December 1934 at Crescent Presbyterian Church on University Road. Anne Elizabeth Vannon was born on 12th January 1939 and was 2 years old when she died on the night of 5th May, whilst being taken to the Mater Hospital. Her brother George was admitted to the same hospital with serious injuries, but he recovered. Mary Elizabeth Vannon was admitted to the Royal Victoria Hospital, where she died of her injuries on 7th May 1941 at the age of 30. And as I said, they were buried in the plot on 9th May 1941. The final headstone grave on this whistle stop tour is this one, and again the inscription is very badly faded, but it reads, "In loving memory of our dear mother, Mary Ann Jerwood, who died 4th July 1942, also our dear brother Albert, who died 14th May 1941. And I've used this one at the end to show how one can make assumptions which subsequently turn out to be misleading as a result of further research and investigation. Albert Curtis Jerwood was born on 25th October 1904 at Hartwell Street to John Jerwood and Mary Ann Hackett. He was injured at Upper Merview Street on the night of 15th, 16th April 1941 and admitted to the Royal Victoria Hospital. He died of his injuries at the RVH on 14th May 1941 at the age of 37 and was buried on 16th May. So the assumption that one could make, seeing a fatality who died on the 14th of May, is that he had been injured in the most recent previous air raids. But in this case, he had actually been injured almost a month before. So he spent almost a month in hospital as a result of the injuries incurred during the second German air raid and died a couple of weeks after the third and fourth German air raids. So it's a salutary lesson that you don't make assumptions. You always look at all the details to try and get to the true story, the true picture. And that brings this part of the talk to an end.